I'm Naomi, 34 years old, and until last month, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 8 years with James, my financial consultant, husband, and I believed we had it all. Then my sister Ava, a pilot, texted me a photo from her Paris flight. My stomach dropped as I stared at the image of James sitting in business class with another woman, a woman who wasn't me. If you're watching this, please subscribe, and let me know where you're viewing from. My story might just save you from the heartbreak I never saw coming. James and I met at a charity gala for children's education 10 years ago. I was working for the marketing team organising the event, and he had just started his financial consulting business. I remember the moment I first saw him across the room confidently discussing investment strategies with a group of impressed donors. His intelligence and passion caught my attention immediately. When our eyes met, I felt that classic flutter in my stomach that romance novels always describe, but I had never experienced before. After circling each other all evening, he finally approached me as the event was winding down. "I've been trying to talk to you all night," he admitted with a charming smile. We ended up being the last two people at the venue talking until the cleaning staff politely asked us to leave. That first conversation flowed so effortlessly, it felt like we'd known each other for years. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. James was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: ambitious, intelligent, attentive, and seemingly devoted. He would surprise me with little gifts that showed he was listening when I mentioned something I liked. Once, after I casually commented about a book I wanted to read, it appeared on my doorstep the next day with a handwritten note. These thoughtful gestures made me feel truly seen. Just before our 2-year anniversary, James proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. We were walking along the beach at sunset when he got down on one knee. The ring was perfect, a vintage sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds that he said reminded him of my eyes. I said yes through tears of joy, believing with absolute certainty that this was my happily ever after. We married at my family's lakeside property in New Hampshire. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed of: intimate, yet elegant, with just 100 of our closest friends and family. My sister Ava was my maid of honour, standing proudly beside me as I said my vows. Looking back at our wedding photos still brings mixed emotions. Everyone looked so happy, so unaware of what would eventually unfold. After the wedding, we settled into our Boston brownstone, a fixer-upper that we renovated together, turning it into our dream home. Each room represented our shared vision and compromise. The kitchen with its large island where we would host dinner parties, the cosy living room with built-in bookshelves for my extensive collection, and the spare bedroom that we planned to convert into a nursery when the time was right. My career at Harrison and Miller Marketing was taking off. I had started as a junior account manager and worked my way up to leading my own team. Just last year, I received a promotion to Executive Director of Client Relations, a position I had been working toward for years. James celebrated my success with champagne and took me to a 5-star restaurant, seeming genuinely proud of my accomplishments. Meanwhile, James was building his financial consulting business, Adams Financial Solutions. What started as a one-man operation from our spare bedroom had grown into a respected firm with 15 employees and a downtown office. His client list included several prominent Boston businesses and a few national companies. He worked long hours, but I admired his dedication and work ethic. We were building our empire together, or so I thought. Our life seemed picture perfect. We took luxurious vacations twice a year, usually to tropical destinations where we could disconnect from our busy lives. We belonged to the right social clubs, attended the right events, and were considered a power couple among our friends. Financial stability gave us freedom and security, allowing us to plan for the future with confidence. As we approached our 7th wedding anniversary, we started discussing having children. I had always wanted to establish my career first, and now felt ready to take that next step. James seemed enthusiastic about the idea, suggesting we start trying after our upcoming anniversary. We even converted the home office into a potential nursery, painting the walls a gentle neutral tone and discussing cribs and changing tables. Throughout all of this, my relationship with my sister Ava remained one of my strongest connections. 3 years older than me, Ava had always been my protector and confidant. After joining a major airline as a pilot, she frequently flew international routes, including regular flights to European destinations. Despite her busy schedule, we made time for weekly calls and monthly sister dates. Whenever she was in town, Ava knew me better than anyone, sometimes understanding my feelings before I could articulate them myself. Looking back, I can now recognize the subtle signs that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. James began working increasingly late hours about 2 years ago. His business trips became more frequent, often with last-minute changes to his schedule. Sometimes I would call his office, only to be told he had stepped out when he had told me he would be in meetings all day. At the time, I rationalized these discrepancies as the natural chaos of a growing business. The physical distance between us grew as well. James would come home exhausted, barely maintaining a conversation through dinner, before retreating to his home office to catch up on emails. Our once passionate physical relationship dwindled to occasional, almost mechanical encounters that left me feeling empty and questioning my attractiveness. Whenever I tried to discuss this growing gap between us, James would blame stress or fatigue, promising things would improve once a particularly demanding project was completed. Despite these concerns, I continued to believe in our marriage. For our 8th anniversary, James gifted me a beautiful diamond bracelet from Tiffany's, inscribed with our wedding date. To many more years together, the card read. I took this as reassurance that he was still committed to our life together, that the distance I felt was simply a phase we would overcome. How wrong I was. The first real sign something wasn't right came when I noticed James becoming increasingly protective of his phone. He had always been open with his devices, often asking me to check his messages if he was driving. Then suddenly his phone never left his sight. He added a new passcode and would step out of rooms to take calls, returning with vague explanations about client confidentiality. At first, I respected his privacy. I trusted him completely and believed his explanations without question. But when behavior patterns change so dramatically, it's hard not to notice. I began paying closer attention, observing his reactions. When his phone buzzed, noting how he would angle the screen away from me while texting. One evening, while reviewing our joint credit card statement, I noticed charges from several upscale restaurants in Boston on dates when James claimed to be working late. Les Bordeaux Arias, the Crimson Room, all places with intimate atmospheres and prices that made them special occasion destinations for us. When I casually mentioned these charges, asking if he'd been entertaining clients, his explanation came too quickly, too rehearsed. He claimed they were business dinners that slipped his mind, but his eyes never quite met mine as he spoke. Then there were the unexplained absences. James would say he was heading to the gym after work, but would return home hours later with no signs of having exercised. When questioned, he would become defensive, turning the conversation around to accuse me of not trusting him. "Don't you have your own life to focus on?" He would snap, a harshness in his tone I had never heard before. These reactions were so out of character that I began to question my own perceptions. I remember one particularly disturbing incident about 4 months ago. While doing laundry, I noticed an unfamiliar scent on James's jacket, a distinctly feminine perfume that wasn't mine. When I mentioned it, he laughed it off, explaining that his new administrative assistant had borrowed his jacket during a fire drill when the office was evacuated. The explanation seemed plausible enough, yet something about his overly detailed response felt rehearsed. Despite these red flags waving in my face, I pushed my suspicions aside. We had built a life together, shared dreams and plans for the future. Admitting something was seriously wrong meant facing the possibility that everything I believed about our relationship might be a lie. It was easier to accept his explanations and maintain the status quo than confront the devastating alternative. Around this time, James informed me he needed to fly to Chicago for an important client meeting. He would be gone for 4 days, staying at the usual hotel he used for business trips. I helped him pack, even ironing his shirts the way he liked. Before he left, I suggested we have dinner together when he returned to reconnect and discuss our plans for starting a family. He seemed distracted, but agreed, kissing me goodbye with what now feels like hollow affection. With James away, I threw myself into work, staying late at the office to finalize a major campaign pitch. In quiet moments, though, my mind would drift to the growing distance between us. I began wondering if having a baby would really strengthen our marriage, or if I was clinging to an idealized vision of our future. Seeking reassurance, I called Ava during one of her layovers. We hadn't spoken much recently due to her hectic flight schedule, but I desperately needed my sister's perspective. As soon as she heard my voice, Ava knew something was wrong. "Naomi, what's going on? You sound off," she said with characteristic directness. I shared my concerns about James's changed behavior, the growing emotional distance, and my uncertainty about our future. Ava listened without interrupting, then asked pointed questions that forced me to confront aspects of my marriage I had been avoiding. "Has he given you any concrete reason not to trust him, or are you just feeling insecure?" she finally asked. When I couldn't provide any definitive evidence beyond my gut feeling, Ava softened her approach. "Sometimes work pressure can make people act differently," she suggested. "But if something doesn't feel right, don't ignore it. You know, I always have your back, right?" Her words comforted me, and I ended the call, feeling more centered. I decided to plan a special evening for James's return, hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. I bought new lingerie, planned his favorite meal, and selected a wine we had been saving for a special occasion. Maybe all we needed was quality time together to reset our connection. The day before James was due to return, I cleaned the house, arranged fresh flowers, and prepared everything for our special evening. I went to sleep that night with renewed hope, blissfully unaware that my entire world was about to shatter. The morning James was supposed to return from Chicago started like any other workday. I got up early, completed my usual routine, and headed to the office for an important client presentation. My team and I had been preparing for weeks, and I was focused on making sure everything went perfectly. I had scheduled the presentation for that morning specifically so I could leave early to prepare for James's return. Just before my presentation was set to begin, I received a call from Ava. Thinking she wanted to follow up on our previous conversation, I let it go to voicemail, planning to call her back afterward. Minutes later, a text notification appeared. "Call me when you can. Important." The presentation went well with the client, showing genuine enthusiasm for our campaign strategy. As my team and I were celebrating in the conference room, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Ava with an attachment. "Isn't this James? He's in business class to Paris with this woman. They look very close." With trembling fingers, I opened the photo. The conference room around me seemed to fade away as I stared at my screen. There was James, unmistakably James, sitting comfortably in a business class seat on a flight to Paris. Next to him was a woman I had never seen before, elegant with sleek dark hair and impeccable style. They were leaning toward each other, sharing what appeared to be an inside joke. His hand rested casually on hers. The world tilted beneath me. James was supposed to be in Chicago. He was supposed to be flying home today. Instead, he was on his way to Paris, with another woman looking happier and more relaxed than I had seen him in months. "Naomi, are you okay?" My colleague, Julia's voice, seemed to come from far away. I must have made a sound because everyone in the conference room was now staring at me with concern. "I need to make a call," I managed to say, my voice barely recognizable to my own ears. I stumbled out of the conference room and into an empty office, locking the door behind me. With shaking hands, I called James. The call went straight to voicemail, his cheerful greeting now sounding like a mockery. "Hi, this is James Adams. I can't take your call right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." The beep sounded, but I couldn't speak. What could I possibly say? Next, I called his office. "Adams Financial Solutions. How may I direct your call?" His receptionist answered brightly. "This is Naomi Adams, James's wife," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I need to speak with him about an urgent family matter." There was a pause before she replied. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Adams, but Mr. Adams isn't in the office this week. He's out of the country on business. Would you like me to leave him a message for when he returns?" "Out of the country," I repeated. "Where exactly?" "I believe he's in Paris for meetings with potential European investors," she answered, sounding slightly confused. "Didn't he tell you he left yesterday afternoon?" The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. "And what about the Chicago meetings, the ones he was supposed to have this week?" Another uncomfortable pause. "I'm not aware of any scheduled meetings in Chicago this month, Mrs. Adams. Is everything all right?" I mumbled something about a misunderstanding and ended the call. My mind was racing, trying to process this new reality. James had lied about where he was going. He had never been in Chicago. He was in Paris with another woman, and apparently his entire office knew about his Paris trip, while I, his wife, had been told a completely different story. I called Ava back immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Naomi, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "I wasn't sure if I should send that, but you needed to know. Tell me everything," I demanded, struggling to keep my voice from breaking. "Everything you saw." Ava explained that she was piloting the flight to Paris when she spotted James during her pre-flight cabin walkthrough. "He didn't see me," she said. They were already settled in, talking closely. I went back to the cockpit and asked one of the flight attendants to discreetly take a photo for me. I just had a bad feeling. "How did they look?" I asked, needing and dreading the answer at the same time. "Familiar," Ava said after a pause. "Comfortable with each other, like people who know each other very well." "Naomi, I'm so sorry." The nausea hit me in waves as Ava continued to describe what she had observed James and the woman sharing a tablet, their heads close together, the woman resting her hand on his arm at one point, the easy intimacy of their interactions. The flight attendant said they declined dinner because they had plans to dine somewhere special in Paris once they landed, Ava added reluctantly. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the office seemed to be closing in. Julia found me there, curled up in the corner, hyperventilating. She didn't ask questions, just helped me to her car and drove me home, staying with me until I assured her I would be all right alone. I wasn't all right. I would never be all right again. Once alone, I stared at the photo Ava had sent, zooming in on details, torturing myself with questions. Who was this woman? How long had this been going on? How many business trips had actually been rendezvous with her? The elegant jewellery the woman wore, was that purchased with our money? The confident smile on James's face, was that the real him, while the distant husband I had been living with was the facade? As the shock began to give way to a cold, clear anger, I realised I needed answers. And those answers weren't going to come from confronting James while he was thousands of miles away, enjoying Paris with his mistress. No, I needed evidence. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I faced him. Little did I know that the photo was just the tip of the iceberg. The truth waiting to be uncovered was far more devastating than I could have imagined. Once I regained my composure, I began a systematic search of our home, looking for any evidence of James's betrayal. I started with his home office, a space I had always respected as his private domain. Now I methodically went through every drawer folder and hidden compartment. In the back of his desk drawer, tucked behind tax documents, I found a stack of hotel receipts from Le Grand Paris, an upscale hotel in the heart of the city. The receipts dated back over a year each for extended stays of 4 to 5 days. The most recent was from just 2 months ago, when James had told me he was at a financial conference in Atlanta. Each receipt showed charges for 2 people, room service for 2, spa services for 2. With growing dread, I turned to his laptop. James had always been careful with his passwords, but he didn't know that I had seen him enter his main password once and had memorized it just in case of emergencies. This certainly qualified. My hands trembled as I typed in the characters, half expecting it not to work. The screen unlocked, revealing his desktop. I started with his email, searching for any correspondence that might explain what I was seeing. It didn't take long to find a folder labeled Personal, hidden within several layers of work folders. Inside were hundreds of emails exchanged with someone named Sophia Laurent, dating back 18 months. The emails started professionally discussions about art pieces and investment opportunities. Sophia Weiland was an art dealer based in Paris who specialized in connecting wealthy clients with investment-grade artwork. But the tone quickly shifted from professional to personal, then to intimate. By the 3rd month of their correspondence, they were exchanging flirtatious messages. By month 6, they were planning their first rendezvous in Paris. I read email after email, each one driving the knife deeper. James described their time together as the real life, and referred to his life with me as the other obligation. In one particularly painful message, he wrote to Sophia, "When I'm with you, I feel truly myself. The man I am in Boston is just going through the motions of a life I outgrew years ago." Photos were attached to many messages. James and Sophia at the Louvre, at elegant restaurants, walking along the Seine at sunset. In each image, they looked blissfully happy the way James and I had been in the early days of our relationship. The most recent emails discussed her moving permanently to the States so they could be together more often. As if this weren't devastating enough, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Credit card statements showed purchases from Tiffany & Co. Cartier and other high-end jewelry stores with amounts far exceeding what he had spent on gifts for me. The dates of these purchases aligned perfectly with his business trips to Paris. I called Tracy, one of our mutual friends, who worked in the financial sector and might have crossed paths with James professionally. After some hesitation, she admitted she had seen James with another woman at a restaurant in Boston several months ago. They looked very intimate. She confessed, her voice heavy with guilt. He saw me and later called to say she was a client and asked me not to mention it to you to avoid any misunderstandings. I wanted to tell you, but he was so insistent that it was innocent. I'm so sorry, Naomi. By this point, I had moved beyond shock into a strange, detached calm. I contacted Ava again, who had landed in Paris and was at her hotel. She offered to track down more information while she was there. The flight attendants noticed them immediately, Ava reported in our call. Apparently, they were very affectionate throughout the flight, holding hands, whispering to each other. At one point, she rested her head on his shoulder to sleep. They were not trying to hide their relationship at all. Ava also mentioned something that the flight attendant had overheard. The woman said something about being excited to show him their apartment and the nursery progress. Nursery? I repeated, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. I'm sorry, Naomi, Ava said gently. The flight attendant thought she heard the woman say she was 5 months along, but she couldn't be certain. 5 months pregnant. While James and I had been discussing starting our own family, he had already created one with someone else. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute that it transcended pain. I felt hollow, as if everything that made me who I was had been scooped out, leaving nothing but an empty shell. By evening, I had compiled a devastating dossier of evidence, emails, receipts, photos, credit card statements, all telling the story of my husband's double life. But I needed more. I needed to know everything before confronting him. The next morning, I contacted a private investigator recommended by a colleague who had gone through a similar situation. Keith Morgan was discreet, thorough, and understood the urgency of my request. I transferred a significant amount from my personal savings to retain his services, wanting answers before James returned. Within 48 hours, Keith had confirmed my worst fears and uncovered even more. James and Sophia didn't just meet in hotels. They had purchased an apartment together in the 6th arrondissement of Paris a year ago. The property was registered under a limited liability company to which both James and Sophia were connected. Keith also confirmed that Sophia was indeed pregnant, approximately 5 months along, based on social media posts visible to her friends, but hidden from public view. Most devastatingly, Keith discovered financial records suggesting James had been systematically transferring money from our joint investments into separate accounts accessible only to him, small amounts at first growing larger over time. By my calculations, he had diverted nearly $200,000 of our shared assets. Armed with this knowledge, I made my decision. I would not confront James while he was still in Paris. I would wait for him to return to lie to my face one more time about where he had been. I would give him every opportunity to come clean. And then I would present the irrefutable evidence of his betrayal. The James first thought I knew the marriage I believed in had been an illusion. Now it was time to face reality, no matter how painful. James was scheduled to return from his Chicago trip on Friday evening. I spent the days leading up to his arrival in a strange state of calm determination. I consulted with a divorce attorney, secured copies of all our financial records, and temporarily moved half of our liquid assets into an account under only my name, a protective measure my attorney strongly recommended, given what we had discovered about James's financial maneuvers. I also prepared our home for the confrontation, removing anything of sentimental value that I couldn't bear to lose in the inevitable fallout. My grandmother's China family photo albums, jewellery passed down through generations, all were safely stored at Ava's apartment. I changed my personal passwords and created new email accounts, severing digital ties that James might access. Throughout these preparations, I maintained a facade of normalcy at work, though I had confided in my direct supervisor about the personal crisis I was facing. She was surprisingly supportive, offering me flexibility with my schedule and projects during this difficult time. When Friday arrived, I took the day off work. I cleaned the house meticulously, a strange compulsion to have everything in perfect order for what would be the final act of our marriage. I arranged the evidence I had gathered on the dining room table, each damning item placed precisely where it couldn't be ignored. At 6:30 p.m. I heard James's key in the lock. I was sitting in the living room dressed casually but carefully, makeup minimal but precise. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my mind, determined to maintain control of my emotions and the narrative. "Naomi, I'm home," James called out his voice, carrying the forced cheerfulness I now recognized as part of his performance. He appeared in the doorway with his suitcase, looking tired but composed. He had brought a small gift bag with the logo of a famous Chicago chocolatier, another prop in his elaborate deception. "Welcome back," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "How was Chicago?" If he noticed anything unusual in my demeanor, he didn't show it. "Productive but exhausting," he replied, setting down his suitcase. "The client was demanding, but I think we made real progress." He handed me the gift bag. "Brought you those truffles you loved from last time." I set the bag aside without opening it. "That's thoughtful. You must be hungry after your flight. I thought we could have dinner and you could tell me all about your trip." James looked relieved at my apparent normalcy. "Let me just freshen up first," he said, gesturing toward our bedroom. "Actually," I interjected, "there's something I'd like to discuss right away. Something important." I stood up and walked toward the dining room, expecting him to follow. After a moment's hesitation, he did. When James saw the organized display of evidence on the table, he froze. His face remained impassive, but I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the back of a chair. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "This is your opportunity to tell me the truth, James," I said calmly. "I'm giving you one chance to be honest with me about where you've really been and what you've really been doing." He attempted to maintain the facade, shaking his head slightly as if confused. "I don't understand. I told you I was in Chicago for meetings with Westfield Capital. We've been through this." I picked up my phone, pulled up the photo Ava had sent, and held it up for him to see. "This was taken 2 days ago on a flight to Paris. That's you in business class sitting next to a woman who isn't your wife." The colour drained from his face as he stared at the image. For a moment, he seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Then, predictably, he shifted to anger. "You're having me followed now. This is an invasion of privacy, Naomi. I can't believe you would stoop to this level of distrust." His voice rose with each word, the classic deflection tactic of someone caught in a lie. "My sister Ava was the pilot on that flight," I replied, refusing to be baited. "She recognized you. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? Now, would you like to explain why you told me you were in Chicago when you were actually flying to Paris with another woman?" James ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I had seen countless times during our marriage. "It's not what you think," he began, the most cliched response of guilty spouses throughout history. "Enlighten me, then," I said, gesturing to the evidence spread before us. "Explain the hotel receipts going back over a year. Explain the emails with Sophia Laurent. Explain the apartment you purchased together in Paris. Explain why she's 5 months pregnant with your child, while you and I have been discussing starting our own family." With each item I mentioned, James seemed to physically diminish the weight of his deception, finally catching up with him. The anger dissipated, replaced by a cornered, desperate expression. "I never meant for this to happen," he finally said, dropping into a chair. "It started as a professional relationship. Sophia connected me with European investors interested in American markets. We worked together, developed a friendship, and then things changed." "Things changed," I repeated flatly. "Things changed for 18 months without you ever thinking to mention it to your wife." James looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of genuine emotion. Not remorse for his actions, but relief at no longer having to maintain the lie. "I found myself living 2 lives," he admitted, "and I didn't know how to end either one." "So you just continued both indefinitely?" I asked incredulously. "Was that the plan, to keep me in the dark while building another life with her?" "I was trapped," he said, a note of self-pity creeping into his voice. "I cared about both of you. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "That worked out well," I responded, unable to keep the bitterness from my tone. "And the pregnancy, was that part of not wanting to hurt anyone too?" James flinched. "That wasn't planned. When Sophia told me, I panicked. I knew I had to make a decision, but I kept putting it off, hoping somehow there would be a solution that wouldn't destroy everything. There is no solution that doesn't destroy everything, James. You've already done that." I gestured to the financial records. "And this systematically moving our money into accounts I can't access, was that also you being trapped and not wanting to hurt anyone?" He had no answer for that, just looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "How far along is she?" I asked, needing to hear him say it. 22 weeks, he admitted quietly. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. While I had been researching fertility options and tracking my cycle, my husband had already created the family we had talked about, just with someone else. "I want you out of this house tonight," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Pack whatever you need for now. You can arrange to collect the rest of your things when I'm not here." "Naomi, please," James began, reaching for my hand across the table. "We should talk about this rationally. We can figure out a way forward." I pulled my hand away as if his touch would burn me. The time for talking was before you started an affair, before you bought property with another woman, before you got her pregnant, before you started hiding our money. There is nothing to discuss now except the terms of our divorce. Divorce? He looked genuinely shocked, as if this outcome had never occurred to him. Isn't that extreme? We've built a life together, Naomi. 8 years of marriage. My laugh was hollow, devoid of any humour. A life built on lies isn't a life at all, James, and it wasn't 8 years of marriage. It was 8 years of me being married to you while you were apparently married to your freedom to do whatever you wanted, regardless of who it hurt. I stood up physically and emotionally, unable to continue the conversation. You have 1 hour to pack your essentials and leave. The locks will be changed tomorrow. Any communication from now on can go through my attorney. I placed a business card on the table beside the evidence of his betrayal. James stared at the card, the reality of the situation finally seeming to sink in. What about all we've built together? The house, the investments, our future plans. You should have thought about that before you built a separate life in Paris, I replied, already walking away. 1 hour, James, not a minute more. I shut myself in the guest bedroom, listening to him move around our home, gathering his belongings. The sound of his suitcase zipping closed his footsteps on the stairs, and finally the front door closing with a decisive click. Only then did I allow myself to cry deep, racking sobs that felt as though they were being torn from the very core of my being. My marriage was over. The future I had planned was gone, and I was left alone to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered beyond recognition. The days following James's departure blurred together in a haze of grief and shock. I moved through my home like a ghost, unable to sleep in our bed, unable to eat at our dining table, unable to sit in our living room without seeing echoes of him everywhere. Every object, every space held memories that now felt tainted, corrupted by the knowledge of his betrayal. I called in sick to work, unable to maintain the facade of normalcy any longer. My supervisor was understanding, arranging for my team to cover my projects and granting me 2 weeks of emergency personal leave. Those 2 weeks became a descent into a darkness I hadn't known existed. Ava flew home early from her Paris rotation, arriving on my doorstep with groceries and determination. She found me still in my pajamas at 3 in the afternoon, staring blankly at the wall, unwashed dishes piled in the sink. Without judgment, she guided me to the shower, put fresh sheets on the guest bed, and set about restoring order to the chaos my home had become. "You don't have to do this," I protested weakly as she folded laundry I had left in the dryer for days. "Yes, I do," she replied simply. "You'd do the same for me." Ava stayed for a week, sleeping on the couch and ensuring I ate regularly. She accompanied me to meetings with my divorce attorney, took notes, when my grief-fogged brain couldn't retain information, and fielded calls from concerned friends and family. Her presence was my lifeline, the only thing keeping me from drowning in the overwhelming pain of betrayal. During this time, James made several attempts to contact me. He left voicemails alternating between apologies and practical questions about the house and finances. He sent emails explaining his side of the story as if there could be any justification for his actions. I forwarded everything to my attorney without response, unable to hear his voice or read his words without feeling physically ill. It was during the 2nd week after his departure that I discovered the worst betrayal of all. My attorney called to inform me that James had emptied our joint checking and savings accounts the day after I confronted him. Over $60,000 gone. Money we had been saving for our future, for the children we had planned to have, for the life we had been building together. Further investigation revealed this was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past year, James had been systematically diverting funds from our investments into private accounts. By my attorney's estimation, he had siphoned off nearly $300,000, far more than the private investigator had initially uncovered. "He's been planning this for some time," my attorney explained gently. These aren't impulsive actions. This level of financial manipulation requires forethought and intention. The realization that James hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, but had been deliberately undermining our financial future for over a year was devastating. It transformed my grief into something harder, colder. The man I had loved, the man I thought I knew, had not only been living a double life, but had been methodically preparing for the day when that deception would be revealed. As the divorce proceedings began, James's true character emerged with startling clarity. He claimed entitlement to half of our Boston home, despite my having contributed the majority of the down payment from an inheritance. He demanded portions of my retirement accounts, arguing that his support had enabled my career advancement. He even attempted to claim some of my personal jewelry as gifts he should be compensated for. Each legal filing felt like a fresh betrayal, a new wound inflicted by someone who once claimed to love me. The James I was dealing with through lawyers and legal documents bore no resemblance to the man I thought I had married. This James was calculating, ruthless, and utterly devoid of remorse for the pain he had caused. Perhaps most painful of all was discovering that several of our friends had known or suspected James's infidelity. During a tearful lunch with my friend Rachel, she confessed seeing James and Sophia together at a restaurant 6 months earlier. He introduced her as a client, Rachel explained, unable to meet my eyes. But the way they looked at each other, I had suspicions, but no proof. I didn't want to hurt you with unconfirmed suspicions. One by one, similar stories emerged. A colleague who had seen them at the airport, a neighbour who had noticed a woman picking James up late one evening when I was out of town. Small observations that taken individually could be explained away, but collectively painted a picture of a community complicit in their silence, allowing my humiliation to continue unchecked. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. Had everyone known but me? Had I been the object of pity, the oblivious wife too trusting to see what was happening right in front of her? The thought made me physically sick, spending nights retching into the toilet as waves of humiliation washed over me. My self-confidence, once rock solid, crumbled completely. I questioned everything, replaying our entire relationship in my mind, wondering how I could have been so blind, so stupid. If I had misread James so completely, what else had I gotten wrong? Who was I, if not the perceptive, intelligent woman I had always believed myself to be? The depression that followed was all-consuming. I stopped going to work altogether, using all my available sick leave and vacation time. I barely ate, losing 20 pounds in a matter of weeks. Sleep became elusive, my nights filled with obsessive thoughts and painful memories. When exhaustion finally claimed me, nightmares jolted me awake, leaving me more drained than before. 3 months after discovering James's betrayal, I hit rock bottom. Ava found me on the bathroom floor, surrounded by shattered glass from a mirror I had punched in, a moment of blind rage. My hand was bleeding, but I felt nothing, just a hollow emptiness that had become my constant companion. "Enough," Ava said firmly, bandaging my hand and helping me to my feet. "This has gone on long enough, Naomi. He's taken enough from you. Don't let him take anything more." Looking at my reflection in the fragments of mirror still clinging to the frame, I hardly recognised myself. Gaunt, pale, with dark circles under lifeless eyes, I had become a ghost of the vibrant woman I once was. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. A tiny spark of anger, of defiance kindled in the emptiness. Ava was right. James had taken my trust, my future, my security, but only I could decide if he would take my spirit as well. Looking at my bandaged hand, I made a decision. This would be the lowest point. From here, I would begin the long, painful process of rebuilding. The journey back to myself began with a single step, admitting I needed help. The morning after my breakdown, I called Dr. Sarah Winters, a therapist recommended by my attorney who specialised in betrayal trauma. When her receptionist offered an appointment 3 weeks out, I broke down on the phone, a raw honesty in my voice. that prompted her to find a cancellation for the following day. That first session was brutal. Sitting in Dr. Winters's softly lit office, surrounded by calming blue walls and comfortable furniture, I poured out the story of my marriage and its devastating end. Dr. Winters listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped me articulate feelings I had been unable to name. "What you're experiencing is a normal response to profound betrayal," she explained when I finally ran out of words. "This isn't just the end of a relationship. It's the loss of your past as you question every memory and the loss of your anticipated future. It's also a fundamental challenge to your understanding of reality." She gave a name to what I was feeling: betrayal trauma. The symptoms I had been experiencing, the intrusive thoughts, insomnia, loss of appetite, mood swings, and hypervigilance, were all typical responses to discovering that someone I had completely trusted had systematically deceived me for years. "Recovery isn't linear," Dr. Winters cautioned. "There will be good days and bad days. The goal isn't to forget or even necessarily to forgive, but to process the trauma so it no longer controls your life." I committed to weekly therapy sessions, a structured approach to healing that gave shape to days that had become formless. Dr. Winters assigned homework exercises to help me reconnect with my body after the dissociation that had followed, the trauma techniques for managing intrusive thoughts and journaling prompts to externalize the swirling emotions inside me. Alongside professional help, I began rebuilding my support network. I reached out to friends I had isolated myself from during my depression, not all at once, but gradually: coffee dates and short walks that slowly expanded my world beyond the four walls of my home. Some relationships couldn't survive the strain of what had happened, particularly with couples who had been our friends rather than mine, but others deepened, revealing strengths I hadn't known existed. Julia from work became an unexpected pillar of support, dropping by with home-cooked meals and dragging me to yoga classes when I protested I wasn't ready for public appearances. My college roommate Madison flew in for a weekend, helping me sort through closets and drawers, still filled with James's things, turning the painful task into a cleansing ritual complete with wine and cathartic playlist of breakup songs. Most importantly, I reconnected with myself. Dr. Winters encouraged me to rediscover activities and interests that had fallen away during my marriage. I signed up for a pottery class I had always wanted to try, reveling in the tactile pleasure of clay beneath my fingers. I joined a book club that focused on women's literature, finding unexpected resonance in stories of female resilience and reinvention. Gradually, I returned to work, first part-time, then resuming my full responsibilities as executive director. My team welcomed me back with warmth and discretion, respecting my privacy while offering subtle support. Immersing myself in creative challenges and client strategies provided a welcome distraction from my personal turmoil, and professional accomplishments rebuilt my shattered confidence, one small victory at a time. As my emotional healing progressed, I turned my attention to practical matters. The divorce proceedings continued becoming increasingly contentious, as James realized I would not be easily manipulated or bullied. I hired a forensic accountant who meticulously traced the money James had diverted, building an irrefutable case of financial fraud that strengthened my position in court. My attorney, Diane Levinson, was a force of nature, anticipating James's legal maneuvers and countering them with precision. "He's used to you accommodating him," she observed after a particularly aggressive filing from his lawyer. "He doesn't know how to handle you standing your ground." Standing my ground became my mantra. When James attempted to claim half of our Boston home, I produced documentation proving my inheritance had covered 60% of the down payment. When he argued for alimony based on his support of my career, I demonstrated how my income had consistently outpaced his. When he tried to claim credit for investments that had performed well, I showed how my financial decisions had been responsible for those gains. 4 months into the divorce process, James's lawyer approached mine with a settlement offer. It was still heavily weighted in his favour, but the mere fact that he was willing to negotiate signalled a shift in the power dynamic. He's realising this fight will cost him more than he'll gain, Diane explained with satisfaction. We have him on the defensive now. We countered with our own terms, a process that continued for weeks, until we reached an agreement I could live with. I kept in the Boston home and my retirement accounts intact. James retained his business and the Paris apartment. We split our remaining joint investments with adjustments made for the funds he had already diverted. It wasn't a perfect outcome, but it allowed me to move forward with financial security and dignity. As the legal battles wound down, I turned my attention to reclaiming my personal space. The home James and I had shared still held too many memories, too many ghosts of our life together. Rather than sell it immediately, I decided to transform it to make it unequivocally mine before deciding whether to stay or go. I hired an interior designer who helped me reimagine each room. Walls were repainted in colours I had always loved, but James had vetoed as too bold. The formal dining room where we had entertained his clients became a home office where I could work comfortably. The spare bedroom that had been designated as a future nursery was converted into a reading nook and meditation space, a sanctuary for my ongoing healing. Perhaps the most significant change was our former bedroom. I couldn't sleep there for months after James left the space, too haunted by intimate memories. With the designer's help, I completely gutted the room, changing everything from the wall colour to the flooring. The king-sized bed we had shared was donated, replaced with a queen that was entirely my own. By the time the renovation was complete, no trace of James remained. It was a new space, free from the weight of betrayal. Throughout this transformation, my relationship with Ava deepened even further. She had been my protector when I was at my most vulnerable and now became my confidant as I rebuilt my life. Despite her busy flight schedule, she made time for weekly sister dates, holding space for both my pain and my emerging strength with equal grace. "I always knew you were resilient," she told me over dinner one evening, "but watching you rise from this has been truly inspiring." 6 months after discovering James's betrayal, I took a significant step in my healing journey. I booked a solo trip to Portugal, a country I had always wanted to visit, but James had dismissed as not worth the trip. For 2 weeks, I explored ancient streets, ate at local restaurants, and sat by the ocean, reconnecting with the woman I had been before marriage, and discovering aspects of myself that had remained dormant during those years. On that trip, I experienced genuine joy for the first time since my world had collapsed. Watching the sunset over Lisbon, a glass of local wine in hand, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The pain wasn't gone, the betrayal not forgotten, but it no longer defined me. I was more than what had happened to me. I was Naomi, whole and complete in myself, resilient beyond measure. After returning from Portugal, I joined a support group for people who had experienced similar betrayals. Hearing others' stories helped normalize my experience and provided perspective that individual therapy couldn't offer. In that safe space, I could express anger, sadness, and eventually hope without fear of judgment or well-intentioned but unhelpful advice to just move on. Through the group, I met Tara, whose husband had left her for his administrative assistant after 20 years of marriage. Despite the devastation of her situation, Tara had rebuilt her life with grace and humour. She became both friend and mentor, someone who understood exactly what I was going through, and could testify that there was light at the end of the tunnel. Around this time, I received unexpected news. James and Sophia had welcomed a baby girl and were now living primarily in Boston with frequent trips to Paris. The information came through a mutual acquaintance and hit me harder than I expected. The abstract knowledge of their child becoming a concrete reality reopened wounds I thought had begun to heal. In therapy, I worked through the complex emotions this news triggered. The grief for the children James and I had planned but would never have. The anger that he had created a family with someone else while still married to me. The strange sense of loss for a life that was never mine but could have been. Dr. Winters helped me see that these feelings didn't represent a setback but were simply part of the ongoing process of healing. Grief isn't something you finish, she explained. It's something you learn to carry differently over time. A year after discovering James's betrayal, I reached a significant milestone in my recovery. I went on my first date since the divorce. Daniel was a landscape architect I met through a friend kind and thoughtful, with no connection to my previous life. The evening was pleasant, if somewhat awkward, both of us navigating the uncertain territory of new beginnings. There was no immediate spark, no dramatic connection, but as we parted ways at the end of the evening, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. This simple dinner represented a step forward, an opening of possibilities that had seemed unimaginable in the depths of my pain. Daniel and I went on 2 more dates before mutually agreeing we were better as friends. The experience, however, had broken the seal. I began cautiously dating again, not seeking a relationship, but allowing myself to enjoy male company without the shadow of James looming over every interaction. Some dates were disasters, providing much-needed laughter when I recounted them to Ava and my friends. Others were pleasant, but forgettable. A few led to connections that, while not lasting, reminded me that I was capable of attraction of interest, of opening myself to the possibility of intimacy again. Through therapy, friendship, professional achievement, and personal rediscovery, I gradually rebuilt a life that was authentically mine. The pain of betrayal never completely disappeared, but it transformed from an all-consuming fire to an occasional ember, a reminder of lessons hard-earned but invaluable. I learned to trust my instincts, those quiet internal alarms I had ignored for too long. I learned that loving deeply requires vulnerability, but not blindness. I discovered that loyalty reveals itself most clearly in crisis, and that sometimes those we expect the least from show up in ways we never anticipated. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that starting over isn't a failure but an act of immense courage, that losing what we thought we wanted can sometimes open the door to what we truly deserve. That pain, when properly processed, becomes wisdom that serves us for the rest of our lives. 2 years after that devastating text from Ava, I stood in my redesigned living room hosting a dinner party for the close friends who had supported me through my darkest days. Looking around at the laughter, the genuine connections, the life I had painstakingly reconstructed, I felt something unexpected gratitude. Not gratitude for James's betrayal or the pain it caused, but gratitude for the woman that pain had revealed. A woman stronger, more authentic, and more compassionate than she had been before. A woman who knew her worth and would never again settle for less than she deserved. That woman was me, and I was finally, genuinely, completely at peace with that truth. Have you ever experienced betrayal that felt like your world was ending? How did you find the strength to rebuild? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories. Remember, sharing these experiences helps others know they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the strength to overcome whatever challenges you're facing.